Welcome to the second installment of Performance Insights. Today we're going to talk about the oboe. And why are we going to talk about the oboe? Well, as most of you know, probably all of you know, this is our 100th concert, Coastal Concerts. And the first agent, the first agent we worked with was Tom Gallant, who is our oboe soloist today. So I figured, well, since he's an oboist and I was an oboist, why let's just explore the oboe a little. So this first slide is a 1741 engraving by William Hogarth entitled "The Enraged Musician." And I pressed the wrong button. Did we lose something? Okay. This is the enraged musician, and he's enraged. This is only a part of the whole engraving, but there's all kinds of street scene where people are making all kinds of noise, but he seems to be particularly enraged by this oboe player here. And one thing are there any woodwind players here? Anybody play flute, clarinet, anything? If you'll notice, he's playing left-handed. Right? Normally it's like this. I mean, like this. But he's playing like this. And you say, well, that's an artist's mistake. But it really isn't. And I will show you why that's not a mistake. The predecessor of the oboe was the shawm. Renaissance instrument used up until the early 1700s. And this is a family of shawms. From the top, you have the alto, the bass, the great bass, the tenor, and the soprano. Typically, these were used for outdoor music, some ceremonial type things. And this is a recording of the shawm consort with a sackbut. Now, there was a brass instrument in there you may have heard, and it was a sackbut. Sackbut was an early trombone. And in this picture, you can see 5 shawm players. This guy here, that guy there, and this guy here are all playing left-handed. There's only one playing right-handed right there. Let's go to the next slide, and we'll talk now about the oboe. And we'll get into right-handed, left-handed business in a bit. This was the name given to the oboe, the first oboe, hautbois, French. High-pitched haut, woodwind bois. Now in England, it became this. And you'll see this word in Shakespeare's plays. When they want music played, it will say hautboy plays. It was a generic term. Obviously, the oboe did not exist in Shakespeare's days. It was a generic term which could mean any of these woodwind shawm-type instruments. And eventually, in England, it became this. Yeah, oh boy. Now, this is one of the first oboes that was invented in France around 1650. This is one of my instruments. And now you can see, I hope you can see, right there is that a key on the one side and a key on the other side. And this fishtail key here. You can play that with either hand on the bottom. So it was common for players in those days to actually switch hands. Well, they didn't switch hands, but you could play it either right-handed or left-handed. You'll also see that it says, sorry, 392. Well, what does that mean? The A of today, when an oboe sounds an A, it's typically around 440 hertz. that 440 cycles per second. Now, why is this 392? I mean, that's a whole step lower than pitch is today. This is an approximation. We don't know exactly what the pitch was in those days, and it varied wildly all over the world, all over the countries, even within individual towns. The pitch could vary wildly, and we have to standardize today if musicians want to move around, play with different ensembles in different countries. You have to standardize. So we've standardized, the early music groups have standardized on, if you want to play French Baroque music on French Baroque instruments, your A will be 392. And what's interesting also that there was no way to measure frequency until the early 19th century. There are some tuning forks that exist from the 18th century, and those ones are around 409, A409. So you see that's not too far from 392. Now, what is the difference between the oboe and the shawm? Primarily in the way the reed is blown. This is the shawm mouthpiece here. This circular flat piece is called the pirouette. The player would put his lips right on the pirouette and just blow. So the lips were not in contact with the reed. So there was no control of the sound from the lips. It was a straight, steady tone. You couldn't get loud, you couldn't get soft. But on the oboe, the player's lips contacted the reed. You were able to make dynamics, you could crescendo, you could play soft, you could vary the sound, and you can now play music like this. So you can hear swells, you can hear it very subtly make nice touches to the phrase. It found great favor with French composers, especially Lully, who was Italian, by the way, in composing his operas. Rameau, all the opera composers of those days. It blended very, very well with the violins. Oh, sorry. And also, it played for entertainments too, kind of the way the shawm did, outdoor entertainments with music such as this. Now, in that ensemble, you hear soprano, alto, tenor, bass. What you had is the two oboes, a tenor oboe, which was this, called a taille de bois. The oboe was about this long. Taille de bois is about this long. And it's very unwieldy to hold because it's so long, your fingers can hardly reach the keys, but what they did is put a curved vocal at the top so that you could actually hold it down in front of you or to the side and get the keys more readily. Now, where did that name come from? Taille de bois. French instrumental music had the names of the various instrument parts. Dessus one, dessus means upper, higher. Dessus two, taille de violon for the stringed instruments. It just meant the larger member of the violin family. And then cant and basse. So that's what the taille de bois got the name. It's not really the name of an instrument. It's the name of the voice part that it played. Also, these instruments were used in a military fashion. Louis XIV had a band of oboes that performed military functions, played marches, outdoor music, such as this. It also blended very well with the trumpets. In fact, it blended so well that you could actually put a trumpet and an oboe together and it sounded like two trumpets. And Vivaldi used this to great effect at the beginning of his Gloria. Here's a short extract and you'll hear what sounds like two trumpets. It's one trumpet and one oboe. Sounds just like two trumpets, right? Let's hear that again. Another function was to provide music for solemn ceremonies. Here's a piece that was written for the interment of Queen Mary in 1695. Again, it's for this group of two oboes, tied oboe, and there's a bassoon also in this. I want you to remember what you listen to now because we're going to come back to that at the very end, but it's very important to remember this. It's called the Queen's Farewell. You hear the muffled drums there. That's very typical of a funeral procession. Now we're going to jump ahead by about 30 years or so. These are English oboes from the beginning of the early 18th century. Now you can see the pitch. It says 415. Again, that's relative, but over the years we can generally say that pitch, orchestral pitch, is rising. And you'll see that as we get on into the 19th century, pitch starts to go up again. Now these are two more oboes that I played. They're both by the same maker, but you can see the different colors. This one is made of boxwood, and that's one of the typical woods that oboes were made out of in this period. It's a very blonde wood, but in this case, it's stained, nitric acid. And the more you stain it, the darker it can get. The other one is a rosewood. So oboes were made of all kinds of different materials. Pear wood was another. That was very soft. They use also African blackwood, which we call grenadilla, which you see in your modern clarinets today. It's the same wood. One of the great pieces of music genres for oboes was from the music of Bach, J.S. Bach. He wrote over 200 cantatas. And in those cantatas are some of the most wonderful music to be played on the oboe. He used it many, many times in the masses, in the passions. So here's a recording of two oboes playing a piece by Bach, the first orchestral suite. And I have to kind of toot my own horn here. This is a recording I made with Boston Baroque. And here's another instrument that Bach used an awful lot, called the oboe d'amore. It's the alto oboe. It's in A. The normal oboe is about that long. The oboe d'amore is about this long. So it's a lower pitched instrument. Very beautiful sound. You'll notice this feature here, this looks like it has an apple in the bell. It does impart a very pastoral quality to the sound. Here's another recording I made of the B minor Mass with Boston Baroque. It's the end of Et in Spiritum, 2 oboes d'amore. And probably the oddest of the bunch, oboe da caccia. Da caccia, anybody? Hunt, of the hunt. They didn't hunt with this. Nor did they hunt on it. The thing that gave it the name was that brass bell. Some of the instruments have wooden bells, but the ones that I had, this is also my instrument, the brass bell. It's a very, very mellow kind of sound, and it's the same range as a tight oboe. It's this big if you unravel it. Being bent, it's easier to play. And when Bach wanted a solo instrument in this range, he always used the oboe da caccia, never the tie. The tie was always a coarser sound that he used for choruses when they had a lot of instruments. That's when he used the tie. Here is, this isn't me. Very mellow sound. There's a great part in the Christmas oratorio where Bach has 2 oboes da caccia and 2 oboes d'amore playing at the same time. It's just a marvelous sound world. Now we're going to jump ahead another 30 years or so, and this is a German oboe from the mid-18th century. You'll see the pitch is now A430. Again, this is relative. But what is happening at this point is playing styles are becoming different. What the oboe had to do was different. The way the composers wrote for it was different. It was a lighter sound. They had to play higher. They weren't playing with the violins all the time, although they could, but primarily the style was of harmonic enhancement of the orchestra. This is the first movement of Haydn Symphony No. 62, and it's typical of a lot of the writing for oboes in this period. They did a lot of that, but there were also, they still had virtuoso things to play. But like I said, the style, the things that composers were writing for the oboe was changing. And right around this time, you'll see keys starting to be added. And one of the first keys that was added was this one here, to play a low C sharp. C sharp did not exist on any of those instruments that I showed you, the low C sharp. That key just was not there. So composers didn't write for it. But now, the first key they added was that one. And you can see, you can't play left-handed because you couldn't reach it with the other hand on the other side. But they still had the fishtail key. This other E-flat key is gone, and now the added key on the side. So it was getting codified now that when you played an instrument, you played it this way. You didn't play it this way. And it's interesting to note here, we'll go to the next slide. This is toward the end of the 18th century. More keys are being added. Now, why did they add keys? Couldn't it play all the notes? Well, yes, it could play all, well, except for the C sharp. It could play all the notes, but composers were starting to write in a way that required more power. The keys were not added for facility. The keys were added to strengthen the weak notes. There are some weak notes on the oboe, like a B flat, an A flat, an F sharp. Just because of the construction, you can't press it. You can't make it sound loud. But if you listen to, say, the Beethoven Eroica, you've got the winds that are really blowing loudly. And you can't do that with that oboe because you'll have some very weak keys, very weak notes. The keys now strengthen those notes. Another instrument that's starting to be developed around this time is the English horn, the cor anglais. This is very closely related to the oboe da caccia. It's an F. You can see it's curved. You say, well, cor anglais, it's got to come from anglais, right? Because it's angled. Cor anglais, but it's interesting. In all the literature, we cannot find a reference to cor anglais. It's always cor anglais. Even Beethoven, in his manuscripts, wrote English's horn. Didn't write cor anglais, it was English's horn. Here is a demonstration of those two instruments. That one, and this one. And a piece by Beethoven. He wrote a couple trios for two oboes and cor anglais. This again is one of my recordings of this piece. Another excerpt kind of demonstrates the facility that you could have with this cor anglais. Now, here we go to the middle of the 19th century. More keys. Say A435 question mark. Yeah, like I said, it's all relative. But you can see the fishtail key is completely gone. More keys all over the place. And this little key up here, it's called a slur key, what some people call an octave key, but what it did was it enhanced the ability to slur certain notes. Some notes you could slur very easily. Some were impossible to slur unless you had that vent key up there. This is the middle of the 19th century German oboe. This was in my collection, as was this. It's late 19th century Viennese instrument. Both these instruments now are in the Museum of Fine Art in Boston. But it's interesting to note, if you look at the bulb at the top, this little turning down here, it's very similar. It has still been retained from the early 19th century. You see the bulb here, the turning here, and the one in the middle. You can see it's all still there in the middle of the late 19th century. And also into the modern. This is a modern Viennese oboe. In Vienna, they play an instrument that is totally different than anywhere else in the world. But you can see that's the bulb at the top is still there, the little thing in the middle, and this turning down here on the bottom is still there. Now we move up to the late 19th, early 20th century. This is an oboe, a French oboe, that would have been played by most of the players in Europe, except in Vienna. Now we're going to listen to some historic recordings of oboes recorded, some of the earliest that we have. This is from 1910. This is a recording that I worked on for a 2 CD set of, it's called the oboe from 1903 to 2003. And what you'll hear is an announcement at the beginning of the record as to what is on the record. And this was typical in the early days of recording, where the guy would stand up in front of the horn and announce what was going to be played.
Oboe solo Petite Mignon by Cesar Adimando, Edison Records.
Cesar Adimando was the principal oboist in the New York Symphony Orchestra, and this recording was made in 1910. You'll notice there was no vibrato at all. Vibrato didn't really start being used on the oboe until the 1920s. This is an oboe from that period, and the first that we hear it is in a recording made in 1926 in England by an oboe player named Leon Goossens. Vibrato there. And there's a joke. Sir Thomas Beecham was the conductor of the Royal Philharmonic for many years, and Goossens was his oboist. Beecham one day asked for the A from the oboe. Goossens played it with his wide vibrato, and Beecham says, "There you are, gentlemen, take your pick." Here's a modern oboe. It can be produced in several different ways. Produced with the jaw, which is not usually the way it's done. It's a fluctuation of the airstream. And it's a pitch variation too. It's not an intensity variation. It is a pitch variation. That's why Beecham made that comment. Now this is the modern oboe family. Here is the oboe you just saw. The modern oboe d'amore, the modern English horn, the modern baritone oboe, and the Heckelthon. Now, the heckelphone is kind of an odd instrument. It's in the bass family of the oboe, but the reason called a heckelphone is because it was made by the German manufacturer of bassoons, the Heckel factory. So, for the lack of another name, it's called the heckelphone. Now, what I'd like to do now is just play you some excerpts of one piece played by period oboes and by modern oboes in succession. So here's, again, the Beethoven Trio that we heard on period instruments. Now on modern instruments. I could spend another half hour just on vibrato alone, but I see we have to kind of move ahead. Remember that piece that I told you should be listening for? The Queen's Farewell. Remember that. Here's an arrangement of a piece called The Queen's Farewell Stomp. It's a modern arrangement written for a period oboe band, 2 oboes, tied hautbois, and bassoons. And now we'll end the discussion with this clip. But oboe players can have fun. They can have fun. So there you are, a short history of the oboe. And thank you for coming, and I hope you enjoy the